The abundance of information in regards to analyzing players keeps morphing through a variety of statistics that has taken over Major League Baseball. And thus, these analytics are resulting in baseball becoming a game where putting the ball in play is becoming less and less frequent. Long gone are the days of simplistic categories like home runs, batting average, and RBIs. Entering a new era of statistics like OPS and WAR. One modern stat that can identify a player's value easier is the 3 true outcome rate. During the early 90s, a team was assembled with prototypical 3 true outcome players long before the stat became mainstream. 90 Sports Nostalgia presents the Detroit Tigers of the 1990s, the original 3 true outcome team. And don't forget to kindly subscribe to 90 Sports Nostalgia so we can hit that 1,000 subscribers mark, as I do want to thank all who have subscribed already. The Detroit Tigers of the 1980s were competitive in the AL East, with talented players winning the World Series title in 1984 and then a division title in 1987. However, a dismal 1989 season signaled that championship window has closed for these Tigers with an aging roster and not much in the farm system, with the exception of perhaps Travis Fryman. Fryman did produce as soon as he came to the big leagues for Detroit. The 4-time All-Star did hit around 20 round trippers a season, drove in close to 100 runs, occasionally drew a walk, but would strike out quite often. Aside from Fryman and the legendary double-play duo of Alan Trammell and Lou Whitaker, who were still valuable but on the decline, the Tigers roster full of players past the prime to go along with the barren farm system made it seem like the dark days were ahead for Detroit. Conversely, that wasn't necessarily the case, as general managers Bill LaJoie and Joe McDonald would acquire players who had power, could get on base, but also had the propensity to fan a lot. These players the Tigers would acquire were your typical high 3 true outcome rate players, and assembling a team with several of these type of players was quite unconventional at this time. The Detroit Tigers signed Tony Phillips from the Oakland A's. During his time in the Bay Area, Phillips wasn't too much of a threat to go yard and didn't wow you with his batting average, but Phillips had the ability to draw walks and could play every position on the field except catcher. While in the Motor City, the Atlanta native was able to add some pop, which wasn't too common for leadoff hitters during this period. Another important acquisition prior to the 1990 season was Cecil Fielder. The hefty first baseman started his MLB career with the Blue Jays, but then decided to play in Japan for a season to be an everyday player. Subsequently, the Tigers signed Fielder to a 2-year, $3 million contract. And Big Daddy did not disappoint, hitting 51 home runs during his first season in Motown in 1990. Furthermore, Fielder could also get on base, but would also strike out at a high rate. The former UNLV star was beloved heavily by the Detroit faithful. Detroit did improve by 20 wins in 1990, and more moves were on the horizon. Enter Joe McDonald, who would be the new Tigers GM and who would acquire a couple of players who were perhaps the 2 players who were the epitome of the 3 true outcome rate during this period. He signed Rob Deere from Milwaukee, then traded with Baltimore for Mickey Tettleton. Before there was Joey Gallo of the Texas Rangers, there was Rob Deere. During his career, Deere hit at least 20 home runs in 8 consecutive seasons, which was a solid accomplishment for hitters at that time. In addition, Deere also led the AL in striking out 4 of those seasons. And shortly after the calendar turned to the year 1991, the Tigers traded for Mickey Tettleton. Similarly to Deere, Tettleton had power, struck out at a high rate, but also walked very frequently. The switch-hitting catcher was going to fit in nicely with the all-or-nothing Tigers team that could also draw walks. People may remember Tettleton for his unique batting stance, but he was an artist at drawing walks. One more transaction of note, the Tigers signed Pete Incaviglia from the Rangers. Incaviglia wasn't quite the wizard of getting on base as some of the other players mentioned above were, but nonetheless, Incaviglia was the type of batter the Tigers liked. With the acquisitions that I mentioned earlier, how do you think the Tigers ranked in the AL in home runs, strikeouts, and walks for the 1991, 92, 93, and 1994 seasons? Well, to no surprise, the 1991 Detroit Tigers led the league in all 3 of those categories as mentioned. And as you see, they're also among the league leaders in those 3 categories during the 92, 93, and 1994 seasons. So did this trailblazing way of acquiring and identifying players who could hit home runs and get on base while overlooking the high amount of strikeouts work out? The Tigers could certainly score runs, and therefore, from an offensive standpoint, it was a success. But the one issue which plagued the Tigers during this period and throughout the 90s was pitching, especially for the 1996 Tigers, as Detroit would experience some dark days in the late 90s and into the 2000s because of their pitching. But I think it's interesting how former GMs Bill LaJoie and especially Joe McDonald went against the norm, I remember these Tigers as being quite entertaining, yet comical but in a joyful way. That's because in ways it was tattooed in my mind the importance of making contact and how deeply negative it was to strike out. Back then, the three most important categories seemed to be home runs, RBIs, and batting average. This graphic I think demonstrates quite nicely who these Tigers were and how different and how unique they were. Now that baseball's going in a direction where the ball's being put in play less and less, where the three true outcome rates are rising, let's not forget the original feast or famine squads of the Detroit Tigers in the early 1990s.